My name is Kara, and I guess you could say I've always been the type to do what's expected of me. Honor roll in high school, a psychology degree from NYU, an internship with a respectable nonprofit. My parents, Ben and Laura Whitman, are the kind of people who have their whole lives mapped out, and for most of my life, I was happy to follow their plan for me. But then I met Jake. Jake wasn't part of any plan, not by a long shot. I can't even say he fit into my world. He came crashing in like a lightning bolt, shaking everything up. And when you're used to following rules, there's something addictive about someone who breaks all of them. We met on a muggy Friday night at a karaoke bar in Brooklyn. I was there with my roommate Paige and some of her friends. Jake was at the bar, leaning back like he owned the place. Messy dark hair, tattoos peeking out from under his worn denim jacket, and this cocky half-smile that could charm the teeth off a rattlesnake. "Who's that?" I whispered to Paige as he sauntered past our table, carrying a beer. She barely glanced up. "Oh, that's Jake Stetson. Total trouble. Don't even think about it." That was all I needed to hear to start thinking about him. By the end of the night, Jake and I were sitting on the curb outside the bar, talking about everything from classic rock to the meaning of life. I found out he was 26, worked odd jobs around the city, and had this inexplicable talent for reading people. He could guess what I was thinking before I even said it. The one thing he didn't tell me. He had a gambling problem. When I introduced Jake to my parents 3 months later, it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. My mom's smile froze as soon as she noticed the tattoo on his forearm. My dad's handshake was stiff and reluctant. "So, Jake," Dad said, sitting across from us in the living room. "What do you do?" "I'm in between jobs right now," Jake said, not missing a beat. Mom shot me a look like, "This is what you've been hiding from us." Jake didn't even flinch under their disapproval. If anything, he leaned into it. "But I've got plans," he added, flashing that roguish smile. "Big ones." I could almost hear my dad thinking, plans don't pay bills. After Jake left, the interrogation began. "Kara, be honest," my mom said, pacing the kitchen. "What exactly do you see in him?" "I love him," I said, as if that explained everything. Mom snorted. "Love doesn't pay for a mortgage. Love doesn't put food on the table. Love doesn't fix it when he loses your savings at a poker table." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Dad folded his arms. "He's a gambler, Kara. Don't act like you didn't know." That night, I confronted Jake. "I need you to be honest with me," I said, crossing my arms as we stood in his tiny studio apartment. "Are you still gambling?" His face darkened, and for the first time, I saw the weight he carried behind his bravado. "Not as much as I used to," he admitted. "I'm trying to quit." "For you." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the warning signs. My parents didn't waste any time giving me an ultimatum. "It's him or us," Mom said, her voice cold and final. "If you marry him, you'll have to figure out how to do it without our help." "Maybe I will," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Maybe I don't need your help." The words felt brave in the moment, but later that night, as I lay in bed, they tasted like poison. To Jake, the ultimatum was a challenge. "I'll prove them wrong," he said, holding my hands tightly. "I'll quit gambling. I'll get a real job. I'll show them I'm not just some loser." For a moment, I believed him. But deep down, a question lingered in the back of my mind: was love enough to save us from ourselves? The ultimatum felt like a loaded gun pointed at my chest. My parents weren't bluffing either. They always prided themselves on being people of their word, even when their word was as cold as January in New York. Dad said it over dinner the next week, his voice calm and resolute. "Kara, if you continue this relationship, you're going to have to live with the consequences. No wedding fund, no support for your future. Nothing. Mom chimed in, cutting into her salmon with a precision that felt surgical. You're smarter than this. We didn't raise you to throw your life away on someone like him. Someone like him. Their words stung because they came from a place of love, twisted as it was. I knew they wanted what was best for me. But what if what they thought was best wasn't what I wanted? I called Jake after dinner, my voice shaky as I told him what happened. They hate me, he said flatly. They don't hate you, I said, though it wasn't entirely true. They just don't understand you. Or us. Yeah, well, your dad looked at me like I'd stolen his car, Jake said with a bitter laugh. It's fine, though. I'm used to it. That's what broke my heart, the way he said it, like he'd been through this 100 times before. Like he expected people to write him off. I don't care what they think, I said, and I meant it in that moment. I'm not giving up on us. Jake decided he was going to prove himself, and for a while, it looked like he was serious. He picked up a steady job at a mechanic shop, working long hours and coming home smelling like grease and sweat. He started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings every Thursday night, something I only knew about because I found the pamphlet in his jacket pocket. He even stopped drinking, at least around me. But the pressure from my parents didn't let up. Sweetheart, this isn't just about money, Mom said during one of her many attempts to talk sense into me. It's about stability. Responsibility. Do you really think Jake is ready for a lifetime commitment? For marriage? I hated that she was making me doubt him. But the truth was, I didn't have an answer. Things came to a head at a family brunch a month later. My cousin Jenna was there with her fiancé, Derek, a walking LinkedIn profile in a perfectly tailored suit. Jenna spent most of the meal gushing about their wedding plans while my mom shot me pointed looks across the table. So, Kara, Jenna said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. When are you and Jake, right? When are you two going to tie the knot? The table went silent. I don't know, I said, forcing a smile. We're not in any rush. Mom jumped in before I could finish. Jake needs to get a few things in order first, she said, her tone sweet but condescending. You know, like a stable job. Or some savings. I felt my face flush. He's working on it, I said through gritted teeth. Working on it isn't the same as having it, Mom replied, her eyes sharp. That night, I told Jake about the brunch. You don't have to prove anything to them, I said, pacing his apartment. They're never going to see the good in you because they don't want to. They've already made up their minds. Jake was sitting on the couch, staring at his hands. Maybe they're right, he said quietly. What? Maybe I'm not good enough for you. He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with doubt. I mean, look at me, Kara. I'm barely scraping by. I've got a record of bad decisions a mile long. And you're everything I'm not. That's not true, I said, sitting beside him. You're smart, and kind, and a gambler, he cut in. I didn't know what to say. The next day, Jake came to me with a plan. I'm done with gambling, he said, his voice firm. For good this time. You said that before, I replied, my tone more bitter than I intended. I mean it, he said. I've got my last meeting tomorrow, and then I'm done. No more cards, no more bets, nothing. I swear. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that scared me more than anything, desperation. Things seemed better for a while. Jake stuck to his promise, and my parents, though still skeptical, started backing off. For a moment, it felt like we might actually have a chance. But then I found a receipt for a high-stakes poker game in his jacket pocket. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my heart sinking with every passing second. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. I just needed one big win, he said, running a hand through his hair. I was going to use it to get us a place. A real place. Somewhere we could start over. You promised me, I said, my voice trembling. I know, he said, his eyes pleading. I messed up. But I did it for us. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. So I did both. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if love was supposed to feel like this, like carrying a weight you couldn't put down, no matter how much it hurt. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my tears had dried, but the ache in my chest hadn't gone away. I wasn't sure what hurt more, Jake's betrayal or the fact that I still couldn't imagine walking away from him. I avoided my parents for the next few days, afraid they'd see right through me. They had a knack for sniffing out when something was wrong, and I didn't have the strength to face their smug "I told you so" faces. But I couldn't avoid the growing storm inside me. Jake's promise to change had been the thread holding us together, and now that it had unraveled, I didn't know what was left. The following Thursday, I decided to surprise Jake after his Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I wanted to see for myself if he was still going, or if the receipt I found had been just the tip of the iceberg. The meeting was held in the basement of a church on the Lower East Side. I slipped in quietly, taking a seat near the back. Jake didn't notice me right away. He was sitting at the front of the circle, fidgeting with a styrofoam cup. I was clean for 3 months, he was saying, his voice low but steady. But last week, I slipped. I told myself it was just one game, but it never is, you know. It's never just one. My heart sank. I keep telling myself I'm going to quit, he continued. For Kara, for us. But the truth is, I don't know if I can. And if I lose her because of this, I don't know what I'll do. I slipped out before the meeting ended, my mind racing. Hearing Jake admit his struggles out loud made it harder to be angry with him. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a reminder that he was fighting a battle I didn't fully understand. But love wasn't supposed to be a battlefield, was it? The next day, I sat down with Paige, my roommate and unofficial life coach. So let me get this straight, she said, leaning back on our couch. You caught him gambling again, and your parents are basically threatening to disown you if you stay with him. Did I miss anything? Nope, that's pretty much the whole mess, I said, slumping against the armrest. Paige frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. Kara, you know I love you, right? And I'm saying this as your friend. But, what are you doing? Why are you putting yourself through this? I sighed. Because I love him. Yeah, but does he love you enough to change? Paige asked, her voice softer now. Or are you just waiting for something that's never going to happen? That question haunted me for the rest of the week. Jake was trying, I could see that. He went to his meetings, picked up extra shifts at the mechanic shop, and even started talking about going back to school. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't help wondering if it was enough. And then my parents dropped another bombshell. Your Aunt Susan's son is coming to town, Mom said casually over the phone. You remember David, don't you? He's an architect now. Very successful. I groaned inwardly. Mom, if this is another one of your setups, I'm not interested. It's not a setup, she insisted, though her tone said otherwise. We just thought it would be nice for you to catch up with him. You two always got along so well as kids. I rolled my eyes. I'll think about it. But I didn't need to think about it. I knew exactly what they were doing. A week later, I found myself sitting across from David at a trendy cafe in Manhattan. He was nice enough, polite, well-dressed, and undeniably attractive. But the entire time he talked about his latest project, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. So, what about you? David asked, smiling warmly. What's new in your life? Oh, not much, I said, stirring my coffee. Just, trying to figure some things out. Yeah, he said, leaning in. Anything I can help with? The offer was kind, but it made me feel sick. When I got back to Jake's apartment that night, he was waiting for me on the couch, a nervous energy radiating off him. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "What's going on?" "I have something to tell you," he said, standing up. "And I need you to hear me out before you say anything." My stomach tightened. "Okay. I'm playing one last game," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "There's a poker tournament in Atlantic City this weekend. The prize money is enough to pay off my debts and get us a place. A real place, Kara. I just need one more chance." I stared at him, my mind spinning. "Jake, no. You can't do this." "Kara, I have to," he said, desperation etched into his face. "I'm doing this for us." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're doing this for you. Don't try to make this about me." He grabbed my hands, his grip firm but pleading. "Please, Kara. Trust me." I wanted to trust him. But trust isn't something you can gamble with. That weekend, I found myself driving to Atlantic City, a knot of dread twisting in my stomach. I told myself I was going to stop him, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I could. When I walked into the casino, the sights and sounds hit me like a tidal wave. Bright lights, the clatter of chips, the hum of voices. And there, at the center of it all, was Jake, sitting at a poker table with a stack of chips in front of him. He didn't see me right away, but when he did, his face froze. "Kara," he said, standing up. "What are you doing here?" "I should ask you the same thing," I said, my voice trembling. "You promised me, Jake." "This is the last time," he said, his eyes begging me to believe him. "I swear." I didn't know whether to stay and watch or turn around and leave. Either way, it felt like I was about to lose. The casino was alive with a pulse that matched my heartbeat, fast, erratic and impossible to ignore. I stood frozen, watching Jake at the poker table. He'd already bought in, his stack of chips sitting in front of him like the weight of every bad decision he'd ever made. He didn't look like the Jake I fell in love with. That Jake was reckless but warm, unpredictable but full of life. The man sitting at the table now was cold, calculating, and wearing a mask of confidence I knew wasn't real. "Kara," he said again, standing as if he could pull me into his world. "Just go home. I'll meet you there later." "No," I said, crossing my arms. "You promised me, Jake. You swore you were done with this." He glanced at the table, then back at me, torn between the game and the person who was supposed to matter most. "I can't walk away now," he said. "Not when I'm this close." "To what?" I asked, my voice rising. "To losing everything. To winning it all," he shot back, his voice low and fierce. I sat down at the edge of the room, my legs too weak to carry me out of there. If I left, I'd spend the rest of the night wondering what happened, whether he won or lost, whether he was okay. If I stayed, I was complicit in this train wreck. The dealer started a new round, and Jake's face transformed into the mask again. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and focused, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. I didn't understand poker, but I could see the way the game was pulling him in. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the rush, the high, the belief that one good hand could change everything. As the hours ticked by, I watched Jake's stack of chips grow and shrink, like the tide coming in and out. At one point, he was down to his last handful of chips, his face pale but his hands steady. "Fold," he said, pushing his cards forward. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. "You should leave," a voice said beside me. I turned to see a man in his 40s, dressed in a sharp suit, watching Jake with the kind of detached interest you'd give a TV show. "Excuse me?" I said. "Guys like him," the man continued, nodding toward Jake. "They don't know when to quit. They win a little, lose a lot, and think they can keep going until the universe decides they deserve a break. Do you know him? I asked, bristling. The man chuckled. I know his type. And I know how this ends. Jake's final hand was one for the movies. He was all in, his entire stack of chips pushed to the center of the table. His opponents were a mix of seasoned players and wide-eyed tourists, all watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. The dealer flipped the river card, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Jake's expression didn't change, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched ever so slightly. He laid his cards down, a straight flush. The table erupted. Jake raked in the pot, his stack of chips towering high enough to block his face. He grinned at me from across the room, and for a moment, I felt the weight in my chest lift. He'd done it. He'd won. It wasn't until we were in his car, speeding down the highway back to Brooklyn, that the cracks started to show. You're quiet, Jake said, glancing at me. Because I don't know what to say, I admitted. You promised me you were done, and then you did this. I told you, Kara, this was the last time, he said, gripping the steering wheel. And I'm just supposed to believe that? I snapped. After everything? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I did this for us, Kara. For our future. No, Jake, I said, my voice breaking. You did it for you. For the rush, the thrill. Don't pretend this was about me. He didn't respond, and the silence between us was heavier than the weight of his winnings in the trunk. When we got back to his apartment, he pulled out the cash, thousands of dollars in crisp bills, and spread it out on the coffee table like some kind of trophy. Look at this, he said, his eyes shining. This is a new start, Kara. A real start. I stared at the money, feeling nothing but exhaustion. What happens when it's gone? It won't be gone, he said quickly. I'll put it to good use. I'll get us a place. I'll take care of you. You'll see. But I didn't see. All I saw was the cycle repeating itself, over and over, until there was nothing left of the Jake I loved. The next morning, my parents called. I heard about Jake's little trip to Atlantic City, Mom said, her voice laced with disapproval. Is this what you want, Kara? A life of wondering when the next disaster will hit? I wanted to defend him, to tell her she didn't understand, but the words felt hollow. Because a part of me was starting to wonder if she was right. Come home, she said softly. It's not too late to walk away. I hung up without answering. That night, Jake came to me with a new plan. I got a job offer, he said, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. One of the guys at the table last night, he's got connections. He thinks I've got potential. Potential for what? I asked, already dreading the answer. To be a professional poker player, he said, his eyes lighting up. Travel tournaments, big prize money. This could be it, Kara. This could be our way out. I stared at him, the man I loved and barely recognized, and realized I was standing at a crossroads. Jake's grin faded as he watched my face. Kara, he said, his voice softening. Say something. What do you want me to say, Jake? I asked, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. That I'm thrilled you're doubling down on the very thing that's tearing us apart. It's not like that, he said quickly. This isn't gambling. This is strategy. Skill. It's the same damn thing. I exploded. Jake, I've been standing by you, fighting for you, lying for you. And for what? So you can chase some pipe dream? He flinched like I'd slapped him. This isn't a dream, Kara. This is real. This is my shot. And what about us? I asked, my voice breaking. What happens when the house wins again? When you're left with nothing, and I'm left picking up the pieces? He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You want to know the worst part? I don't even know if I'm angry at you anymore, or if I'm just angry at myself for believing in you. I stormed out of his apartment, needing air, space, anything but the suffocating weight of that conversation. I walked for what felt like hours, my phone buzzing in my pocket with texts from Jake. Jake, I'm sorry. Jake, come back. Please. Jake, I can't do this without you. I wanted to turn off my phone, to shut him out completely. But a part of me, the part that still loved him, couldn't let go. When I got back to my apartment, Paige was waiting for me. I saw the light on and figured you'd need this, she said, handing me a glass of wine. I sank onto the couch, taking a long sip before answering. He wants to be a professional poker player. Paige's eyebrows shot up. Wow. That's ambitious. Yeah, I said bitterly. He thinks it's his way out. Our way out. Paige tilted her head, studying me. And what do you think? I think I'm exhausted, I admitted. I'm tired of fighting, of hoping, of waiting for him to become the person I need him to be. So what are you going to do? She asked gently. I didn't have an answer. The next day, I went to my parents' house, half expecting them to greet me with "I told you so" speeches. But to my surprise, my mom just pulled me into a hug. We're not here to say we were right, she said softly. We just want you to know that we love you, and we're here when you're ready to come home. Dad, ever the practical one, added, it's not too late to fix this, Kara. But you have to ask yourself if this is the life you want. I wanted to scream at them for not understanding, but the truth was, I didn't understand it myself. That night, Jake showed up at my apartment. I'm sorry, he said as soon as I opened the door. I shouldn't have sprung that on you. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. What do you want, Jake? To make things right, he said, his eyes earnest. I'll turn down the job. I'll quit poker. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us together. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. But I'd heard those words before. Jake, I said, my voice trembling. I love you. But love isn't enough. Not when I can't trust you to keep your promises. I can change, he insisted. Maybe you can, I said, my heart breaking. But I can't wait around for you to figure it out. The silence that followed was unbearable. Jake looked at me like I'd just ripped out his heart, and maybe I had. So that's it, he asked finally. You're giving up on us. I'm not giving up, I said, tears streaming down my face. I'm choosing me. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping as he turned to leave. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions, grief, relief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I stayed busy, throwing myself into work and spending more time with Paige and my parents. Every now and then, I'd hear from Jake. A text here, a voicemail there. He told me he'd quit gambling for good, that he'd taken a job at the mechanic shop full-time. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without him. One evening, months later, I found myself at a coffee shop, flipping through an old journal. The last entry was from the night I met Jake, and it brought back a flood of memories, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I didn't regret loving him. But I didn't regret letting him go, either. As I walked home, the city lights shimmering around me, I realized something. Jake might have been my greatest gamble, but I wasn't the one who lost. The first time I saw Jake again, it was 6 months later, on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I was at a bookstore in Soho, flipping through a novel I had no intention of buying, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Kara. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. Turning around, I found myself face to face with him. He looked different, cleaner somehow, more put together. His hair was shorter, and he was wearing a button-down shirt instead of his usual beat-up jacket. Jake, I said, my voice catching. Hey, he said with a small, tentative smile. I didn't expect to see you here. Same, I replied, unsure of what else to say. We ended up sitting in a cafe down the street, the awkwardness between us palpable. Jake stirred his coffee, glancing at me like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to look too long. You look good, he said finally. Thanks, I said, taking a sip of my tea. So do you. He nodded, setting his spoon down. Quit gambling. For real this time. I raised an eyebrow, and he chuckled nervously. I know. You've heard that before. But it's different now. I've been going to meetings every week, and I've been working full-time at the shop. Got a promotion, actually. That's great, Jake, I said, genuinely meaning it. Yeah, he said, his gaze dropping to the table. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was proud of him, but another part was wary, unsure if this new version of Jake was here to stay. Over the next few weeks, we started talking again, first casually, then more regularly. It was strange, like rediscovering someone you thought you knew. Jake seemed different, more grounded, but there were still moments when I caught glimpses of the old him, the restless energy, the charm that could light up a room. Do you think we could ever try again? He asked one night, after we'd been talking on the phone for hours. The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I don't know, Jake, I said honestly. A lot's changed. I've changed. So have I, he said quietly. One evening, I met him for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. He was waiting for me outside, holding a single sunflower, my favorite. I remember you said roses were overrated, he said, handing it to me. I smiled, tucking the flower into my bag as we walked inside. Over pasta and wine, we talked about everything, his job, my plans to go back to school, the things we'd learned about ourselves since the breakup. I think losing you was the wake-up call I needed, Jake admitted, his eyes meeting mine. I had to figure out who I was without the gambling, without the chaos. And for the first time, I actually liked the guy I'm becoming. His words touched something deep inside me, but they also scared me. You can't change for me, Jake, I said gently. You have to do it for yourself. I know, he said, his voice steady. And I am. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope you'd be part of the picture. When we parted ways that night, I found myself staring at my reflection in the subway window, my mind spinning. Could I trust him again? Could I risk reopening that door, knowing it might lead to more heartbreak? Or was it time to close the chapter for good? Weeks turned into months, and Jake and I continued to see each other, slowly, cautiously, like two people learning to walk on thin ice. I didn't tell my parents right away. I wasn't ready for their judgment, their skepticism. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered between us. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I was making the same mistake all over again. But there were also moments of hope, moments when I saw the man Jake was trying to become and thought, maybe this could work. The last time my parents gave me an ultimatum, I chose Jake. This time, I chose myself. And maybe that's why it felt different, because I wasn't trying to save him. I was letting him save himself. A year later, Jake and I sat across from my parents at their dining room table, the air thick with tension. So, Dad said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. You're still working at the shop? Yes, sir, Jake said, sitting up straighter. I'm actually managing the team now. And I've been saving up for a down payment on a place. Mom glanced at me, her expression unreadable. And the gambling? Jake met her gaze without flinching. I haven't touched a card in over a year. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Dad sighed, leaning back in his chair. Well, he said, I guess we'll see how this goes. It wasn't approval, exactly. But it was a start. Jake and I didn't get a perfect ending. Life doesn't work that way. But we got something better, a chance to write a new story, one day at a time. As I stood in the doorway of our new apartment, watching Jake unpack a box of dishes, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in years. Love isn't about winning or losing. It's about choosing. And this time, we chose each other.